Hello everybody and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Today we're going to be talking about Uncle Nearest Whiskey. This is a 100 proof whiskey out of Tennessee, and it's actually seen a lot of success already. Now this is a blend of a couple of different whiskeys. Now here's the thing, it's not MGP as you may have already kind of guessed, but it's not. It's from a couple of random distilleries. It's one out of Nashville, I think, and one elsewhere. And they take both of those, they blended them together, and like I said, they've seen a lot of success. Enough so that they've begun actually making their own stuff and building their own distillery. So whereas normally I would talk about the distillery, since it's not quite there yet, I'm going to kind of skip past that. But I did want to mention that their new stuff, called Uncle Nearest Silver, is triple charcoal filled, so it's filtered. So it's very similar to what Jack Daniel's does with the double charcoal filtered, but one more. So there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different like stills and filtering, all those kind of things, and I'll talk about those in a future video. But for now, let's talk about the namesake of this particular whiskey. So Uncle Nearest, you know, that sounds kind of vague, honestly. But if you look into it, there's a man named Nathan Green, and he was the first African-American master distiller in the United States, at least that's recognized. So you know, that's kind of where it comes from. His nickname was Uncle Nearest, and they said something to the effect, I mean, he was a slave at one point, and they said something to the effect of him being kind of nearest to the family. So, I don't know. Either way, his nickname's Uncle Nearest, and that's what everybody in Lynchburg, Tennessee knows him as. So he actually worked for the Jack Daniel's distillery until about 1881, and so he was kind of a big deal there. In fact, he was their first master distiller. Now you may be thinking to yourself like, holy crap, how did I never hear of this, before? You always hear of Jack Daniels, and some people be like, oh, well, his real name was Jasper Daniels, like back in my very first episode when I thought I was very knowledgeable. And, but this is a rare thing. This actually only got uncovered in, I think it was 2017, like early in 2017. So fairly new information. And in general, like he was accredited with a lot of stuff. He was this first, actually I think they called him head stiller, which ultimately became master distiller as far as the terminology goes. But he also helped to define and perfect the Lincoln County process, which is that charcoal mellowing process. So anyway, this whiskey that's actually in the bottle, the dram I'm going to share with you today, and someday I'll probably do the other one as well. This is sourced, and it is barreled at about 110 proof. It comes out at about 100 proof, and that is a funny thing that I'll get into in a minute. But I want to go into the nosing and the tasting here. So let's go ahead and pour a dram. And you can see a little bit of this bottle's already gone, which is nice. I did have some fun with this the other night, but I will get into that in a minute. So let's go ahead and give this a nose. Now there is something very cool about the nose and the taste on this, and I'll fill you in afterwards. But if you have a bottle of this, by all means join me. All right, so let's go ahead and nose. Now be careful because it is 100 proof, and nosing anything that high, you have a chance of burning. There's a little tip that you could do. If you open your mouth when you inhale through your nose, you won't get quite as much of an alcohol burn. So for me, the first few things that I get on the nose are oak, caramel. You've got kind of like the sweetness that comes with corn for sure. There's cinnamon and there's vanilla. So it is very much a standard bourbon with a little bit extra, in my opinion, of the sweetness coming from a corn and maybe a little bit more cinnamon than you would typically get. A lot of times bourbons have none of that cinnamon, but in this case, that's kind of what I would say. Oak, caramel, cinnamon, corn, and vanilla. So let's go ahead and give this a taste. Cheers. So at 100 proof, one thing that you'll note is this is very smooth. And that's great. That owes itself 100% to that charcoal filtering. And in fact, this is one of those whiskeys that kind of makes you salivate as soon as you drink it. Very interesting, actually. Like sometimes a whiskey will be a little heavy with tannins and it kind of feels like it dries out your tongue. This is doing the exact opposite. So the reason I said there's a cool thing between the nose and the taste is that the taste actually mimics, in my opinion, the nose exactly. You've got oak, caramel, corn, oak caramel corn, cinnamon, and vanilla. And it's perfect. Like, its nose matches the taste. I don't recall ever having that be the case on any whiskey I've reviewed on this channel. So first for me, for sure. So let me tell you about this whiskey and just kind of give you my overall impression. So I'm going to turn this to the side so you can see. I've drank, I think it was bottled up to about here. So that's about 5 drams out of here. Actually, call it 6 drams. So the very first time I had this whiskey, I didn't like it. I actually didn't like it at all. And I had a friend over and he had it with me, and he's a bit of a whiskey drinker, not nearly to the extent that I am or some of my other whiskey tube friends, but he drinks enough to be not a novice. And we both looked at each other because this is what happened, right? So I got a sample of this, and when I get a sample, I almost always have people over because I just love to share this stuff, I feel like happy that I'm getting free samples, and I'm like, I want to share this with people. So that's exactly what happened. I invited him over. Hey, come try this whiskey I got. I had a few bottles. We tried this, and both of us were just like, oh man, this is not good at all. This tastes so just unrefined. I think that was probably the right way to put it. It tasted young and maybe a little bit just dirty. It just wasn't great. So much so that I put this aside for a couple of months, and I just was hesitant to even do a review on it. And I always kind of have that caveat whenever I do a whiskey review with anybody who sends me something, is that if I don't like the whiskey and I choose not to, if I don't like the whiskey, I'll just not review it, because I'm not going to just go on here and totally talk trash about somebody who sent me something for free. I mean, that's kind of crappy. So in this case, I was actually considering not doing a review of this. And then I waited a couple of months, and I tried it again, maybe a few nights ago. And I was sitting on the couch, I was just watching TV, and I had a dram, and I had a second dram, and then I had a third dram. And I was actually pretty impressed. I found it much better the second time around after a couple of months of aging. So much so, I forgot that it was 100 proof. And when I woke up the next morning with a bit of a headache, I was surprised, because I actually thought it was like an 86, just based off the mellowness and the how smooth it was. So anyway, I found that to be kind of interesting, and I don't ever wake up with headaches. You guys have seen some of my live streams. I'll have 7 drams in an hour, and I feel fine the next morning. This, I think I underestimated 100 proof whiskey and drank it really fast. So one more quick thing. This is $60. I don't love this for $60, and that sucks. I love this for $40 to $45. I think that's the right price point. Now, here's the problem. Small distilleries have to charge more, and it's really an unfortunate thing. But when you really think about it, it's the same thing that happens with major stores and mom and pop shops. The mom and pop shops can't keep up with the major stores like a Walmart or a Target or whatever, and so they have to charge more because they have to pay their employees a fair wage, all that kind of stuff. And that's what's going on here. They're paying for a new distillery. They're paying for ramping up production. They're paying for all kinds of stuff, and they need to make that money. So $60 makes sense to do for a small distillery. It doesn't make sense to do that. If this was, I don't know, call it Woodford Reserve or something, charging $60 for this, I would not buy it, even consider buying it. So this is what I suggest for you. If you see this bottle around, try it. See what you think. If you are interested in supporting a small distillery, that's when you should buy it. If you're interested in supporting a small distillery anyway, then you should buy it. But they're going to be coming out with more pretty soon, and it's going to be 100% their own stuff. I mean, this stuff only ages for a few years. So me personally, I'm going to reserve my judgment of whether I personally would buy another bottle of this until that comes out. That being said, if you see this, give it a shot. See what you think. You probably will like it, but that $60 is kind of your decision to make whether that's worth it to you or not. Anyway, this has been another episode of the Whiskey Dictionary. Thank you very much for joining me here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers.